The radio transmission came through at 0347 hours, fragmented and desperate, barely audible over the sound of sustained gunfire. Under heavy contact, Commander Harrison is down. They're taking him. Then, static. Nothing but the white noise of a radio frequency that had gone dead, carrying with it the last words of a SEAL team that had just lost its leader. In the Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Remington, Captain Lily Scott stood frozen, her coffee cup halfway to her lips as the room erupted into controlled chaos. Officers scrambled to their stations, satellite feeds were redirected, quick reaction forces were alerted. But none of it mattered, because the follow-up transmission that came 2 minutes later confirmed everyone's worst fear. TOC, this is Trident 2-6 actual. The voice was tight with suppressed emotion. Commander Harrison was captured alive. I repeat, captured alive. Enemy forces extracted him from the contact area. We have his last known position before they disappeared into the mountains. Captured alive. Those 2 words changed everything. In combat, there were worse things than death, especially for high-value personnel who carried classified information, who knew operational details that could compromise ongoing missions and get American soldiers killed. Lily's hand was already moving toward her tactical vest, muscle memory overriding conscious thought, before the base commander even finished issuing orders for a rescue operation planning session. She knew those mountains. She'd operated in them for the past 8 months, running reconnaissance missions, gathering intelligence on insurgent networks, learning terrain that most soldiers only saw through satellite imagery. And she knew Commander Ryan Harrison, knew him in ways that went beyond professional respect, though she'd never acted on those feelings, never crossed that line. He was SEAL Team 7's commander, a man who'd earned his trident through years of the hardest training the military could devise, who'd led men through impossible situations and brought them home. He was also the man who'd personally requested her for intelligence support on his operations, who'd trusted her assessments when planning his team's missions, who'd looked at her with an expression that suggested his feelings might mirror her own. Now he was in enemy hands, and the clock was already ticking. But before we show you what happens when a female intelligence officer decides that waiting for official rescue operations isn't acceptable, when she chooses to walk alone into hostile territory to extract a captured SEAL commander, and when her skills prove that some warriors don't need a team to accomplish impossible missions, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because what's about to unfold will demonstrate that love and loyalty can be more powerful motivators than any order, and that the most dangerous operators are often the ones motivated by personal stakes. The mission briefing was predictably cautious. A full-scale rescue operation would take time to plan, coordinate, and execute. Intelligence needed to be gathered. The enemy's location needed to be confirmed. Rules of engagement needed to be established. Best-case scenario, a rescue force could be on target in 36 hours. Lily sat through the briefing, said nothing, and made her decision. 36 hours was a death sentence. Whatever information Harrison knew, the enemy would extract it long before any official rescue arrived. And if the intel she had on this particular insurgent group was accurate, and it always was, they had ways of making prisoners talk that were medieval in their brutality. She waited until the briefing ended, until officers dispersed to their various planning cells, until the TOC settled into the organized tension of a complex operation being coordinated. Then, she walked calmly to her quarters, changed into civilian clothes that would help her blend into the local population, and began packing the equipment she'd need. Her M4 carbine, suppressed with night vision optic, 6 magazines, 180 rounds, sidearm with 3 spare mags, fragmentation grenades, smoke grenades, medical kit, communication equipment, GPS cache for bribes if needed, and most importantly, the intelligence files she'd been compiling for months on the insurgent networks operating in these mountains, files that included the locations of their camps, their routines, their vulnerabilities. She knew where they'd take Harrison. There was only one facility in the area capable of holding a high-value prisoner, a compound in the Zangal Valley, approximately 15 kilometers from where the SEAL team had been ambushed. It was run by a particularly ruthless insurgent leader named Khalid Rahman, who'd made a career of capturing coalition forces and using them for propaganda purposes before executing them on camera. Lily had been tracking Rahman for 6 months, had marked every known location associated with his network, had studied his patterns with the obsessive attention to detail that made her one of the best intelligence officers in theater. She knew his compound's layout from satellite imagery and agent reports. She knew where they'd hold prisoners. She knew how many guards typically manned the facility. She knew their shift changes, their weak points, their standard operating procedures. What she didn't know was whether she could pull off a solo infiltration and extraction against overwhelming odds. But she was going to find out. At 0530 hours, while the FOB was focused on planning an operation that would launch the next day, Lily slipped through a drainage culvert in the perimeter fence, a vulnerability she'd identified months ago and kept to herself for exactly this kind of situation. By the time anyone noticed she was gone, she'd be too far into the mountains to recall. The terrain was brutal even by Afghan standards. Steep ridgelines cut by deep wadis, scattered with boulders that could hide an ambush or break an ankle with equal efficiency. The pre-dawn darkness provided concealment, but made navigation treacherous. Lily moved with practiced caution, using her night vision to pick her route, keeping to terrain that offered cover and avoiding the obvious trails that would be watched or booby-trapped. She'd done this kind of movement before, not as part of any sanctioned operation, but during unauthorized reconnaissance missions where she'd pushed beyond approved boundaries to gather intelligence that official channels couldn't access. She knew how to move through hostile territory, how to read terrain, how to become invisible to an enemy that owned the ground she was crossing. 3 hours of hard movement brought her to an observation position overlooking the Zangal Valley. Through her spotting scope, she could see the compound, a collection of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall, with guards visible on the perimeter. Exactly where her intelligence had predicted Harrison would be taken. She counted sentries, noted their positions, tracked their movement patterns. 6 external guards on a rotation that seemed to change every 2 hours. Probably more inside the buildings. The main structure in the center of the compound would be where they'd hold a high-value prisoner, both for security and to keep him away from external walls that could be breached. Lily watched, gathered information, built her mental map of the compound's defenses. The official rescue force would have air assets, heavy weapons, overwhelming manpower. She had herself, her rifle, her grenades, and the element of surprise. It would have to be enough. She waited until 1400 hours, when the afternoon heat made sentries lazy and observation less vigilant. Then she began her approach, using a wadi that offered concealment almost to the compound's western wall. The movement was agonizingly slow. Any sound, any visible movement could alert defenders and turn her mission into a suicide run. 200 meters from the compound, 150. She could hear voices now, guards talking among themselves, the sound of normal activity from people who didn't expect to be attacked in what they considered safe territory deep behind their own lines. Lily reached the western wall, pressed herself against the sun-warmed mud brick, controlled her breathing, listened. The nearest guard was approximately 10 meters away, on the other side of the wall, smoking and talking on a cell phone. She could hear his conversation, something about family, complaints about being assigned to guard duty when he wanted to be at a wedding in his home village. She pulled a flashbang grenade from her vest, armed it, counted to 3, and lobbed it over the wall toward where she'd heard the guard's voice. The explosion was thunderous in the confined space, immediately followed by shouting and confusion. Lily was already moving, scaling the wall with practiced efficiency, weapon up and scanning for targets as she cleared the top. The guard she'd targeted was down, disoriented by the flashbang. She put 2 suppressed rounds into him and moved toward the main building, using the confusion to close distance before the compound's defenders could organize a response. More guards appeared, running toward the sound of the explosion. Lily engaged them with controlled precision, double tap to center mass, transition to the next target, don't stop moving. Her M4 worked smoothly, the suppressor reducing her acoustic signature enough that in the chaos, defenders couldn't immediately pinpoint her location. She reached the main building, stacked up beside the door, pulled another flashbang, and breached. The interior was dim after the bright afternoon sunlight, but her eyes adjusted quickly. A corridor stretching toward the back of the building, doors on either side, and two guards at the far end, spinning toward the sound of entry. Lily's rifle was already tracking to target. 4 rounds, both guards down. She was moving forward before their bodies hit the ground. She cleared rooms methodically, left, right, each one empty or containing insurgents who didn't have time to react before she put them down. The compound's defenders were rallying now, realizing they were under attack. Sustained gunfire erupted outside, rounds impacting the building's walls. Lily ignored it, focused on her mission. Harrison was here somewhere, probably in a room designed to hold prisoners, probably under guard. She found him in the last room at the end of the corridor, a bare cell with a single window. Harrison zip-tied to a chair, his face already showing signs of interrogation. 2 guards stood over him, one with a knife, both turning in surprise as Lily kicked open the door. Her M4 spoke twice. Both guards dropped. Harrison looked up, his eyes widening in recognition and disbelief. "Captain Scott?" "What the hell? How?" "Explanations later, Commander," Lily interrupted, moving to cut his zip ties with her tactical knife. "Can you move?" "I can move," Harrison confirmed, though she could see he was injured, favoring his left side, moving with the careful deliberation of someone with cracked ribs or internal injuries. "But we're not getting out of here the way you came in. This place is swarming with hostiles." "I know," Lily replied, helping him to his feet and handing him a pistol from her vest. "That's why we're not going out the same way. There's a drainage tunnel that exits the compound on the north side. I spotted it on satellite imagery. It'll be tight, but it's our best option." "You planned an infiltration and extraction based on satellite imagery?" Harrison asked, his tone mixing incredulity with professional respect. "That's either brilliant or insane." "Can't it be both?" Lily replied, moving to the door and scanning the corridor. "Stay behind me. Conserve your strength. If I go down, you take my rifle and fight your way out. The FOB knows you're missing. If you can get clear of this compound, air assets will extract you." "If you go down, we both go down," Harrison corrected. "You came here for me, Captain." "I'm not leaving without you." There wasn't time to argue. Lily led them back through the corridor, toward a side door she'd noted during her initial breach. Outside, the compound was chaos, defenders firing at shadows, trying to locate an enemy they couldn't see, shouting contradictory orders. The drainage tunnel was exactly where the imagery had showed it, a narrow opening in the compound's north wall designed to channel water away during the infrequent rains. It was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, and Harrison's injuries made the movement agonizing, but it offered concealment from the searching defenders. They emerged outside the compound's perimeter, in a rocky area that provided some cover, but left them exposed to observation from the walls. Lily grabbed Harrison's arm, pulled him toward a cluster of boulders 50 meters away that offered better protection. They'd covered maybe 20 meters when the compound's defenders spotted them. Gunfire erupted, rounds cracking past them, impacting rocks and earth. Lily returned fire, short controlled bursts to suppress the shooters, while Harrison stumbled forward, clearly running on determination more than physical capability. They reached the boulders, took cover, and Lily assessed their situation. They'd made it out of the compound, but they were still deep in enemy territory with hostile forces actively hunting them. The exfiltration route she'd planned would take them through 15 kilometers of mountains that the enemy knew intimately. "Can you make it 15 clicks on foot?" Lily asked Harrison, already knowing the answer but needing to hear his assessment. "I'll make it," Harrison replied, though his voice was tight with pain. "But we need to move now before they organize a pursuit." Lily pulled out her GPS, confirmed their position, calculated the route back to friendly territory. The most direct path would take them through terrain that was exposed and dangerous. The safer route would add hours to their journey and give the enemy more time to cut off their escape. "We go direct," Lily decided. "Speed over security. The longer we're out here, the more likely they intercept us." They moved out, Harrison keeping pace despite his obvious injuries, Lily covering their rear, scanning constantly for pursuit. The afternoon heat was brutal, temperatures pushing well over 100 degrees, and the thin mountain air made every meter feel like a kilometer. Behind them, Lily could hear the sound of vehicles starting. The enemy was organizing a mounted pursuit. That changed the tactical equation significantly. On foot, she and Harrison could use terrain that vehicles couldn't traverse, but it also meant they'd be leaving a trail that experienced trackers could follow. 2 hours into their exfiltration, moving through a narrow wadi that offered concealment from observation, Lily heard the sound she'd been dreading. The distinctive thump of helicopter rotors, not American birds, but older Soviet-era aircraft that insurgent groups had access to, perfect for moving fighters quickly to cut off an escape route. "We've got air assets inbound," Lily reported, scanning the sky. "They're going to try to get ahead of us, set up blocking positions." "Then we go to ground," Harrison decided. "Find a position we can defend, call for extract, and hold until help arrives." "Negative," Lily countered. "Your wounds need treatment sooner rather than later. We need to keep moving, reach the extraction point I designated." "Captain Scott," Harrison's voice took on the tone of command, "I appreciate the rescue, but I'm still in charge here. We're not moving into an area where enemy air assets can spot us." Lily turned to face him, her expression intense. "Commander, with respect, you're not in charge of this operation. I am. I didn't come this far and risk this much to lose you because you're too stubborn to trust my judgment." For a long moment they stared at each other, both battle-hardened officers with strong wills and clear ideas about how to proceed. Then Harrison's expression softened slightly. "Why did you come?" he asked quietly. "Why risk a court-martial in your career to extract me solo?" Lily opened her mouth, closed it, struggled with how to answer that question honestly without crossing professional lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Finally, she just said what was true. "Because leaving you here wasn't an option. Because you matter more than regulations. Because—" She stopped, took a breath. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I hadn't tried." Harrison was quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay. We do this your way. But if we make it back, you and I are having a conversation about what you just said." "Deal," Lily agreed. "Now move before those helicopters spot us." They pushed on, using every bit of cover the terrain provided, moving when the helicopters weren't overhead, freezing when the sound of rotors came close. The enemy was searching systematically, trying to locate them before they could reach friendly territory. 3 hours from the compound, moving through an area of broken terrain that made vehicle pursuit impossible, Lily heard something that made her heart sink. Voices speaking Pashto, close enough that they couldn't be more than 100 meters away. A ground pursuit force, probably inserted by those helicopters sweeping the area. She pulled Harrison into cover behind a cluster of rocks, both of them controlling their breathing, weapons ready. The voices came closer. She could hear multiple individuals, maybe 5 or 6, moving tactically, clearly experienced fighters who knew how to track in these mountains. "We can't outrun them," Harrison whispered, his voice strained. "Not with me slowing you down. You should go ahead, get clear, call in air support." "Not happening," Lily replied firmly. "We both get out or neither of us does." The enemy patrol was close now, close enough that Lily could hear individual words. They were discussing tracks they'd found, signs of recent passage. The pursuit force was onto them, would spot their position in the next minute or two. Lily made a decision. She pulled 2 fragmentation grenades from her vest, handed one to Harrison. "On my signal, we throw toward their position, use the confusion to break contact and move," she whispered. "Head northwest, toward that ridgeline. I'll be right behind you." "Captain?" "That's an order, Commander," Lily interrupted, allowing steel into her voice. "You're wounded and I'm mobile. I'll delay them. You move to extract." Before Harrison could argue, Lily pulled the pin on her grenade and threw it toward the sound of voices. The explosion was followed immediately by screaming and gunfire, the enemy patrol firing blindly at where they thought the threat was coming from. "Move," Lily ordered, and Harrison moved, stumbling through the rocks toward the ridgeline while Lily provided covering fire, her M4 engaging targets that appeared in the smoke and confusion. She counted 5 enemy fighters, now 4, 3 still combat effective. Her rifle was running low on ammunition. She was on her last magazine, maybe 20 rounds remaining. Not enough for a sustained firefight. Lily threw her second grenade, used the explosion as cover to break contact, sprinted toward where Harrison had disappeared over the ridgeline. Rounds cracked past her head, impacted rocks around her feet, but she kept moving, kept her weapon up, ready to engage any threat. She cleared the ridgeline, found Harrison waiting in cover on the far side. Together they moved down the reverse slope, putting terrain between themselves and the pursuit force, gaining precious distance and time. "That was stupid," Harrison said as they moved, "staying behind like that." "That was necessary," Lily corrected, "and it worked." They kept moving, Harrison's pace slowing as exhaustion and pain took their toll. Lily could see he was reaching his limits, running on willpower and determination, but that would only carry him so far. The GPS showed they were 5 kilometers from the extraction point, a clearing that was large enough for helicopter landing and far enough from enemy concentrations to be relatively safe. 5 kilometers. Might as well be 50 the way Harrison was moving. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of red and gold, when Lily's radio crackled to life, the first transmission that had reached her since she'd left the FAO-B. "Any friendly forces? This is Viper 1-1, searching for Captain Lily Scott and Commander Ryan Harrison. How copy?" Lily keyed her radio immediately. "Viper 1-1, this is Captain Scott. I have Commander Harrison. We are mobile, moving to Extraction Point Bravo, requesting immediate evac. Over." The response was immediate and emotional. Scott: "TOC actual. Where the hell have you been? You've had us worried sick. Stand by for extract. Birds are inbound to your position. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. They just had to survive 15 more minutes. But the enemy had heard the radio transmission too. Within minutes, Lily could hear the sounds of pursuit intensifying. Vehicles moving, voices shouting, the enemy throwing everything they had at intercepting them before extraction arrived. "We're not going to make it to the clearing," Harrison assessed, his tactical experience reading the situation accurately. "They're going to cut us off." "Then we hold here," Lily decided, looking around at their position. They were in a cluster of rocks that offered some protection, with reasonable fields of fire. Not ideal, but it would have to do. "We dig in. Hold until extract arrives." They set up a hasty defensive position, both of them facing outward, weapons covering the most likely avenues of approach. Lily had maybe 15 rounds left. Harrison had the pistol she'd given him, 1 magazine, against an unknown number of enemy fighters who would be highly motivated to recapture their escaped prisoner. "If this goes bad," Harrison started. "It's not going bad," Lily interrupted. "We've come too far for that." The first enemy fighters appeared on the ridgeline above them, silhouettes against the darkening sky. Lily engaged them with controlled fire, forcing them to take cover. Harrison fired his pistol, conserving ammunition, only taking shots he was confident would hit. More enemy appeared from their flanks, trying to surround the position. Lily threw her last smoke grenade, using the concealment to reposition, denying the enemy clear shots. Her M4 clicked empty. Out of ammunition, the bolt locked back on an empty chamber. She transitioned to her sidearm, a Glock 19 with 3 magazines, knowing that against this many enemies, it would be a delaying action at best. "Captain," Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of command and something else, regret maybe, or farewell. "It's been an honor." "Save the eulogies, Commander," Lily replied, firing at an enemy fighter who'd gotten too close. "We're not dead yet." That's when she heard it, the most beautiful sound in the world. Helicopter rotors getting louder, and then the distinctive sound of minigun fire as the extract birds engaged the enemy positions surrounding them. 2 Blackhawks appeared, one laying down suppressing fire while the other descended toward their position, its crew chief waving frantically for them to board. Lily grabbed Harrison, half-carried him the final 20 meters to the helicopter, threw him aboard, and climbed in after him. The instant her boots left the ground, the pilot was pulling pitch, the Black Hawk clawing for altitude, while its partner continued to engage enemy forces. They were airborne, they were safe, they were going home. Lily collapsed against the cargo bay wall, exhausted beyond measure, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was crashing. Harrison was beside her, medics already working on his injuries, but his eyes were on her, carrying an expression that was complex and intense. The flight back to the FOB took 20 minutes. By the time they landed, word had spread throughout the base. The intelligence officer who'd gone rogue, the solo infiltration and extraction, the successful rescue against impossible odds. The base commander was waiting on the landing pad, his expression unreadable as Lily climbed out of the helicopter. She came to attention, prepared for the court-martial that would inevitably follow her unauthorized mission. "Captain Scott," the commander said formally, "you violated approximately 17 different regulations, ignored a direct order to remain on base, and conducted an unauthorized combat operation in hostile territory." "Yes, sir," Lily acknowledged. "You also saved Commander Harrison's life, prevented the compromise of classified information, and accomplished a mission that we were still planning when you were already executing it." The commander's expression softened slightly. "I don't know whether to promote you or court-martial you." "Sir, I'll accept whatever consequences—" "Later," the commander interrupted, watching as medics loaded Harrison onto a stretcher. "Right now, get yourself checked out by medical, file your after-action report, and get some rest. We'll discuss your spectacular disregard for regulations after I've had time to figure out how to explain this to higher command." 3 days later, after Harrison had been stabilized and was recovering in the FOB medical facility, Lily went to visit him. He was sitting up in bed, his torso wrapped in bandages, but his eyes were clear and alert. "Captain Scott," he said formally, though his expression was warm. "Come to check on your extraction?" "Something like that," Lily replied, pulling up a chair beside his bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got captured, beaten, and then dragged 15 kilometers through mountains," Harrison replied honestly, "but alive, which is more than I expected after they grabbed me." "That's on you." "I was just doing what needed to be done," Lily said. "No," Harrison corrected. "You were doing something that nobody else would have attempted. You went into enemy territory alone to get me back. That's not duty, Captain. That's something else entirely." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, "You said we'd have a conversation when we got back." "I did," Harrison acknowledged, "and I'm a man of my word. So here it is. I'm recommending you for the Silver Star for valor. I'm also putting in paperwork for you to be assigned to SEAL Team 7 as our permanent intelligence liaison. And," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "when we're not on duty, when we're not wearing these uniforms and maintaining these ranks, I'd like to take you to dinner. A real dinner, not in a mess hall, not in a combat zone, somewhere civilized where we can have the conversation we've been avoiding for the past 8 months." Lily smiled, feeling something warm bloom in her chest despite everything they'd just been through. "I'd like that, Commander." "Ryan," he corrected. "When we're off duty, call me Ryan." "Then call me Lily," she replied, "when we're off duty." 2 months later, back in the States, at a formal ceremony attended by senior leadership and members of Congress, Captain Lily Scott stood at attention while a general pinned the Silver Star on her chest. The citation read, "For gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States, demonstrated exceptional courage by conducting a solo infiltration and extraction operation to rescue a captured teammate, displaying valor and tactical expertise that saved American lives and prevented intelligence compromise." But the medal Lily valued most was simpler. A SEAL trident given to her by Harrison, inscribed on the back with words that meant more than any official commendation. "Not on my watch. Ryan." Because that was the truth at the heart of everything. When someone you cared about was in danger, when someone you loved was in enemy hands, regulations and protocols and proper procedures meant nothing compared to the simple truth that leaving them behind wasn't an option. Enemy forces had captured the SEAL commander. They'd thought they had time to extract intelligence, to use him for propaganda, to demonstrate that American forces could be beaten. They hadn't counted on Lily Scott. They hadn't known that she would walk into their camp alone, would fight her way through their defenses, would risk everything to get him back. And they'd learned, too late, that the most dangerous operators aren't always the ones with the most impressive titles or the biggest teams. Sometimes they're the ones motivated by something deeper than duty, something that makes the impossible possible and turns solo operations into success stories. Lily had gone alone into enemy territory for Ryan Harrison, and she'd brought him home, because that's what warriors did when someone they loved was in danger. They answered the call, regardless of the odds. They walked into hell if necessary, and they brought their people home, no matter what it took. The ceremony concluded with a reception where SEAL Team 7 presented Lily with a custom-made challenge coin. Master Chief Thomas Blake, the team's senior enlisted advisor, made the presentation with uncharacteristic emotion in his voice. "Ma'am, we've worked with a lot of intelligence officers over the years," Blake said, the rest of the team standing behind him in formation. "Most of them are good at their jobs, provide solid intel, keep us informed. But you're the first one who walked into hell alone to bring our commander back. That's not intelligence work. That's brotherhood." Lieutenant Daniel Cruz, Harrison's second-in-command who'd led the team after the commander's capture, stepped forward. "Captain Scott, you did what we were still planning. While we were coordinating assets and building operational folders, you were already executing. That's the kind of initiative that saves lives." Petty Officer Emma Foster, the team's communications specialist, added quietly, "You brought him home, ma'am. That's all that matters." Harrison stood beside Lily. His injuries healed enough that he'd returned to full duty, though doctors said he'd carry scars from that interrogation for the rest of his life. As the team dispersed, he turned to her with an expression that carried more than professional respect. "That dinner invitation still stands," he said. "Tomorrow night, 1900 hours, that Italian place off base you mentioned once. Wear something that isn't camouflage." Lily smiled. "It's a date, Ryan. Because some missions ended with medals and ceremonies, but the best ones ended with new beginnings, with the understanding that the strongest bonds were forged not in training facilities or briefing rooms, but in the crucible of impossible situations where one person's courage meant the difference between life and death." Lily Scott had walked alone into enemy territory and brought back Commander Ryan Harrison, and in doing so, she'd proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon in a warrior's arsenal wasn't technology or training or tactics. It was the refusal to leave someone behind, no matter the cost. That was the warrior's code. That was the heart of every mission that mattered. And that was why, when Harrison looked at Lily during that ceremony, his eyes carried not just gratitude, but something deeper. Recognition that she'd risked everything for him, and that kind of sacrifice created bonds that regulations and rank could never define. The enemy had captured him. She had gone alone to get him back, and together they'd proven that some stories end not with defeat but with redemption, rescue, and the promise of something more. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales of courage.